"What's between your legs?" Lone mafia boss asked his maid on Christmas Eve. What he saw left the city of Harborview did not welcome Christmas. It tolerated it. The coastal metropolis was a sprawling grid of steel and concrete that seemed to trap the freezing Atlantic winds, funneling them down the avenues with a bite that went straight to the bone. In December, the city council draped strings of white lights across the main boulevards and erected a massive spruce in the financial district. But the festive glow did little to warm the gray streets. The lights merely reflected off the dirty slush and the tinted windows of passing black sedans, looking less like decorations and more like warning flares in the mist. Lorenzo Valenti stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of his penthouse, looking down at the grid of his kingdom. At 32 years old, Enzo was the undisputed head of the Valenti crime family, a man whose name was spoken in hushed tones from the shipping docks to the mayor's office. He was a man composed of sharp angles and tailored wool, his dark hair kept short, his jawline perpetually set in an expression of grim resolve. To the outside world, Enzo was a monster in an Italian suit, a man who had consolidated power through ruthless efficiency to the silence of his penthouse. He was simply alone. The apartment was a masterpiece of modern architecture, all chrome, glass, and black leather, kept clinically neat. There were no personal photographs on the mantel, no stray jackets thrown over chairs, no remnants of a life shared with anyone else. He turned away from the view of the city he owned and walked to his desk, where a stack of financial ledgers waited. He preferred paper to digital screens. Paper could be burned. He spent his nights this way, reviewing numbers, watching surveillance footage from his clubs and warehouses, and drinking water. He rarely drank alcohol alone. He needed his edge sharp. People in his circle, his captains and advisors, often urged him to find a companion. They paraded women in front of him at galas, models, actresses, daughters of other powerful men. Enzo dismissed them all. He did not have time for relationships. Relationships were liabilities. They were soft spots in armor that needed to be impenetrable. The only time Enzo allowed himself a moment of humanity was on Tuesdays, when he drove his nondescript sedan to the old cemetery on the north side of the city. He would visit the graves of his parents, leaving expensive white lilies that no one would ever see him place. He would stand there for 10 minutes, the wind whipping at his coat, staring at the headstones, before turning his back on the dead to return to the business of the living. 5 miles away, in a drafty rental on the edge of town where the streetlights flickered and often died, Clara Hayes sat at her kitchen table, counting cash. She was 27, with a face that might have been beautiful if it wasn't perpetually drawn tight with exhaustion. Her hair, a soft chestnut color, was pulled back in a severe bun, a practical style for a woman who worked 3 jobs. "We are short again," she whispered to the empty room. She looked at the stack of bills next to the small pile of currency, rent, heating, and the most terrifying one of all, the tuition bill for her younger brother, Evan. Evan was 20, brilliant, and the only good thing she had left in her life. He was studying engineering at the city university, a future she was determined to buy for him, dollar by painfully earned dollar. Clara stood up to put the kettle on, and the movement was not fluid. She pushed herself up from the chair, favoring her left leg, her weight shifting awkwardly before she found her balance. Underneath her long, shapeless denim skirt, a heavy medical brace encased her leg from thigh to knee. It was an ugly, functional cage of carbon fiber and metal hinges that locked and unlocked with every step. She never wore shorts. She never wore dresses that cut above the knee. She never went to the beach. Clara Hayes was a woman who lived in hiding, concealing the wreckage of her body just as carefully as she concealed the details of her past. Her phone buzzed on the table. It was the placement agency. "Miss Hayes?" the woman on the other end said, her voice brisk. "We have an opening. High-end residential cleaning and housekeeping, live-in required. The pay is triple your current rate at the hotel." Clara gripped the phone. Triple. That would cover Evan's tuition for the semester and leave enough for the heating bill. "I'll take it." "Where is it?" The "The client values privacy," the agent said. "You will sign a non-disclosure agreement before you are given the address, but I can tell you it is the penthouse at the Obsidian Tower." Clara felt a cold knot form in her stomach. Everyone in Harborview knew who owned the penthouse at the Obsidian. Lorenzo Valenti. She looked at the tuition bill again. She thought of Evan, who was currently asleep in the next room, dreaming of a life where he didn't have to look over his shoulder. "I will take it," Clara said, her voice steady despite the trembling of her hand. The first time she met him, she wanted to run. Clara stood in the foyer of the penthouse, her small suitcase by her side. The elevator doors had opened directly into the apartment, revealing a space so vast and cold it felt like the lobby of a bank. Enzo walked into the room a moment later. He was taller than he looked in the few grainy news photos she had seen. He moved with a predator's grace, silent and assured. He wore a dark gray dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms that were thick with muscle. He stopped 10 feet away from her, his eyes sweeping over her in a quick, dismissive assessment. He looked at her sensible shoes, her high-necked blouse, and the long skirt that brushed her ankles. "You are the new maid," he stated. It wasn't a question. His voice was a deep baritone, cool and commanding. "Yes, sir. Clara Hayes," she said, clutching the handle of her bag. Enzo's gaze dropped to her legs. He stared for a fraction of a second too long. Clara froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. She knew what he saw, the slight unevenness in her stance, the way she kept her weight on her right side. She waited for the question, the sneer, the intrusive curiosity, but he said nothing about it. "The study is off limits unless I am present," Enzo said, looking back up to her face. "Dinner is at 7, though I rarely eat it. Laundry is on Mondays and Thursdays. Do not speak to my guests unless spoken to. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir," Clara said. "Good." He turned his back on her. "The housekeeper's quarters are off the kitchen. Get settled." He walked away without looking back, disappearing down a long hallway. Clara let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The tension in the air evaporated, leaving her shaking. He was terrifying. Yes, but he was also distant. Distant she could handle. Over the next week, the penthouse began to change. It was a subtle shift, like the slow turning of a season. Clara worked with a quiet, relentless efficiency. She scrubbed floors that were already clean and polished silver that already shined, needing to justify the exorbitant salary she was being paid. But she also began to inject small signs of life into the sterile environment. The thermostat, which Enzo kept at a meat locker chill of 65 degrees, was nudged up to 68, then 70. Enzo noticed it on the third day. He walked into the living room, paused, and looked at the digital control on the wall. He frowned, his hand hovering over the buttons to lower it back down. Then he hesitated. He looked at Clara, who was dusting the bookshelves on the far side of the room, wearing a thick cardigan over her uniform. He dropped his hand and walked away. The temperature stayed at 70. The disposable coffee cups he used in the mornings vanished, replaced by heavy ceramic mugs that held the heat. The paper plates he used for his rare, solitary meals were swapped for the fine bone china that had been gathering dust in the cabinets. And then there was the music. Enzo came home early one afternoon to hear the faint, haunting sound of a cello drifting through the apartment. It was a slow, instrumental Christmas carol, something melancholic and beautiful. He found Clara in the dining room, polishing the long mahogany table. She had a small portable radio sitting on the sideboard, playing the music at a volume so low it was almost a whisper. She saw him and immediately reached out to snap the radio off. "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't hear the elevator." "Leave it," Enzo grunted, loosening his tie as he walked past her toward the bar. "Sir? The music," he said, pouring himself a glass of water. "It is... fine. Leave it on." He didn't tell her that the silence of the apartment had started to ring in his ears lately. He didn't tell her that the soft music made the empty space feel less like a tomb. Clara watched him, her hand hovering over the radio. She nodded once, turned the volume up a fraction of a degree, and went back to polishing the table. Enzo began to watch her. He told himself it was a matter of security. He needed to know who was living in his house, observing her habits, ensuring she wasn't a plant from a rival family. But as he watched the surveillance feeds from the living room and kitchen, his focus shifted from security to curiosity. He saw things she tried to hide. He saw her on the stairs. The penthouse had a floating staircase leading to a loft library, a beautiful architectural feature that was clearly a torture device for her. Enzo stood on the balcony of the loft one evening, hidden in the shadows, looking down as Clara ascended the stairs with a basket of laundry. She took them one by one. Step, drag, pause. Step, drag, pause. Halfway up, she stopped. She set the basket down on the step and pressed the heel of her hand hard into her left thigh, right above the knee. Her face contorted, her eyes squeezing shut. She exhaled a sharp, hissing breath through her teeth, her shoulders hunched against a sudden spike of agony. Enzo's hand tightened on the railing. He should look away. It felt invasive to witness this private battle, but he didn't look away. He watched as Clara took 3 deep breaths, composed her face into a mask of neutral efficiency, picked up the heavy basket, and continued the climb. She didn't groan. She didn't cry out. She simply endured. Enzo felt a strange flicker of respect in his chest, in his world. Men folded under far less pressure than whatever she was carrying in that leg. The reality of his world crashed into her domestic bubble 10 days before Christmas. Clara had made a fresh pot of coffee and placed it on a silver tray. She walked toward the living room, intending to leave it on the sideboard, but the voices stopped her. Enzo was not alone. 2 men sat on the leather sofas, men with thick necks and suits that strained at the shoulders. The air was thick with tension and the smell of expensive cologne. Castillo is pushing on the docks. Enzo, one of the men was saying, his voice a gravelly growl. 2 of our shipments were tagged yesterday. If we don't push back, we look weak. We do not strike blindly. Enzo's voice cut through the air, colder than ice. Castillo wants a war to distract us from the expansion in the south. If we hit the docks, we play his game. So we do nothing? The other man asked. I did not say that, Enzo replied. I said we do not hit the docks. We hit the supply line. I want the warehouse on 4th Street burned. Tonight. Make it look like an electrical fault. Clara stood frozen in the doorway, the tray trembling in her hands. Arson, turf wars. This wasn't a movie, this was a Tuesday afternoon. She took a step back, trying to retreat, but the china cup on the tray rattled against the saucer. 3 heads snapped toward her. The 2 men reached inside their jackets with terrifying speed. Stop! Enzo barked. The men froze, their hands hovering near their armpits. Enzo looked at Clara. His eyes were devoid of the almost tolerance she had seen in the kitchen. They were flat, dead, and dangerous. I brought coffee, Clara stammered. I'm sorry. I'll go. Leave it, Enzo commanded. She walked forward, her legs feeling like lead. She set the tray down on the coffee table, acutely aware of the 2 men staring at her, watching her limp, judging her threat level. A problem that needs cleaning up, one of the men muttered, eyeing her back as she turned to leave. Enzo's voice was low, but it carried across the room. She is staff. Luca. Focus. Clara hurried out of the room, her heart pounding in her throat. She went to the kitchen and braced her hands against the cool granite counter, breathing hard. She should leave. She should pack her bag and run. But where? To the street? To the eviction notices? She stayed. 2 hours later, the men were gone. The apartment was quiet again. Clara was in the hallway, collecting the trash from the small office Enzo used for household management. The door was ajar. Enzo was standing at the desk with his accountant, a small, nervous man named Mr. Henderson. The bonuses for the house staff at the estate, Enzo was saying. Double them this year. Double, sir? Henderson asked. That is a significant expenditure. It has been a cold winter, Enzo said, signing a document. People have heating bills. Clara paused, her hand on the doorframe. And the request from the Veterans Hospital? Henderson asked. The surgery for the retired driver? Pay it, Enzo said, anonymously. Use the Shell Corporation. The full amount? The full amount. And ensure his rehabilitation is covered for 6 months. Clara stepped back into the shadows of the hall. She felt a profound sense of disorientation. This was the man who had ordered a warehouse burned down 2 hours ago. This was the monster everyone in Harborview feared. She watched as Henderson left, and Enzo stood alone in the office, rubbing his temples as if he had a headache that never went away. He didn't look like a kingpin. He looked exhausted. Clara realized then that she didn't know which version of him was the truth. Perhaps they both were. The thought made the simple fear she felt toward him curdle into something more complicated, something that felt dangerously like curiosity. It was Christmas Eve. The city was being battered by a storm that had turned the skyline into a white blur. Enzo came home late, well past midnight. He let himself in, the heavy oak door clicking shut behind him. He looked like he had walked through a blizzard. Snow dusted the shoulders of his black wool coat and melted in his dark hair. His tie was loosened, the top button of his shirt undone, exposing the hollow of his throat. Clara was in the kitchen. She shouldn't have been awake, but the storm had made her leg ache with a deep, throbbing pressure that made sleep impossible. She had come down to make tea and clean the oven, a mindless task to distract her from the pain. She was scrubbing the stovetop, her sleeves rolled up to her elbows, her hair escaping its bun in wispy tendrils around her face. She turned as she heard his footsteps, a spray bottle in one hand, a rag in the other. Enzo stopped in the doorway of the kitchen. He blinked, his eyes adjusting to the warmer light of the room. He looked at her, really looked at her, in a way he hadn't since the first day. He took in the messy hair, the flush on her cheeks from the exertion of scrubbing, the soapy water on her hands. He walked into the room to get a glass of water. The kitchen island was between them, but the space felt suddenly very small. Clara moved to step out of his way just as he moved to bypass her. They almost collided near the refrigerator. Clara gasped and rocked back on her heels, her bad leg protesting the sudden shift in weight. She stumbled slightly. Enzo's hand shot out, catching her by the upper arm to steady her. His grip was firm, his fingers warm through the fabric of her blouse. They went still. Enzo was close enough that she could smell him, the scent of cold air, expensive whiskey, and something masculine and woodsy beneath it. He looked down at her, his face inches from hers. His eyes were dark, dilated in the dim light. He didn't let go of her arm. His gaze traveled over her face, tracing the curve of her jaw, the pulse fluttering in her neck. Then, his eyes dropped to her lips. For a heartbeat. The silence in the kitchen wasn't empty. It was heavy, charged with a sudden, confusing electricity. Clara felt her breath hitch. She saw his hand tighten slightly on her arm, his thumb brushing against her sleeve in a movement that was almost a caress. Then, the mask slammed back into place. Enzo released her abruptly. Stepping back as if he had been burned, he turned his face away, jaw clenching. "Good night, Clara," he muttered, his voice rougher than usual. He walked out of the kitchen without looking back, leaving his glass of water untouched on the counter. Clara stood there, gripping the edge of the island, her heart racing against her ribs like a trapped bird. She touched the spot on her arm where his hand had been. It felt hot. Outside, the wind howled against the glass, but the storm inside the penthouse had just begun. The storm descended on Harborview like a judgment. It was not merely snow, it was a white wall of ice and wind that screamed off the Atlantic, burying the gray streets and freezing the harbor water into slush. By 4 p.m. on Christmas Eve, the mayor had declared a state of emergency. By 5, the roads were impassable. At the Obsidian Tower, the staff had been dismissed hours ago. The doorman, the concierge, and the cleaning crews had all hurried home to their families, clutching bonuses and bracing against the wind. The building was silent, a monolith of glass standing defiant against the gale. Only Clara Hayes remained in the penthouse. She had volunteered to stay. When the head housekeeper offered the shift with triple holiday pay, Clara had done the mental math instantly. The sum would cover the specialized engineering textbooks Evan needed for his spring semester, with enough left over to fix the heater in their rental. It was a trade she would make 1,000 times over, her Christmas for his future. But now, with the city disappeared behind a curtain of white outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the silence of the apartment felt heavy. It was a vast, hollow space, beautiful and cold. Clara was in the corner of the living room, hidden behind the high-back leather armchair where Enzo usually took his morning coffee. Tucked away in this alcove was a small fir tree, real, not plastic, that she had dragged up the service elevator 2 days ago. It was only 4 feet tall, smelling of pine and cold earth, a scent that cut through the sterile lemon polish smell of the penthouse. She was balanced precariously on a small wooden step stool, her left leg stiff and awkward as she tried to fix a string of lights that had gone dark near the top. "Work," she whispered to the bulb, twisting it with her fingers. "Please work." She shifted her weight, and her leg gave a sharp, warning throb. She gritted her teeth, ignoring the familiar fire in her knee. She reached higher, the hem of her soft gray sweater riding up, her long wool skirt swishing around her ankles. She did not hear the elevator doors slide open. She did not hear the heavy footsteps on the marble floor, muffled by the howling of the wind outside. Enzo Valenti stood in the archway of the living room, a ghost in his own home. He had been at the warehouse in the South District for 6 hours. The meeting had been a disaster. The rumor of a mole was no longer just a rumor. Money was missing from the transport fund, and codes had been leaked. He had spent the holiday eve looking into the eyes of men he had known for 10 years, wondering which one of them was selling him out. He had drunk whiskey with them, a toast to loyalty that tasted like ash in his mouth. He wasn't drunk, it took more than a bottle to dull his edges, but he was raw. His nerves felt stripped of their insulation. His coat was heavy with melted snow. His tie hung loose around his neck, and his jaw ached from hours of clenching his teeth. He had expected a dark, empty apartment. He had expected to pour another drink and stare at the white noise of the blizzard until he passed out. Instead, he saw a glow in the corner. He walked forward, his movement silent. He saw the small tree, its multicolored lights casting warm, fragmented shadows on the wall. He saw the woman balanced on the stool. Clara, she looked different. She wasn't wearing her stiff uniform. She wore a thick, oversized sweater that swallowed her frame and a long, flowing skirt. Her hair was down for the first time, a curtain of chestnut waves falling over her shoulder. She looked soft. She looked like a piece of a life he had never been allowed to touch. "What is this?" His voice was a low rumble, worn down by exhaustion. Clara gasped, a sharp intake of breath that echoed in the quiet room. She jerked around, losing her balance on the stool. Her bad leg buckled. Enzo moved before he thought. He crossed the distance in 2 long strides, his hands shooting out to catch her by the waist before she could hit the floor. He took her weight easily, swinging her down from the stool until her feet were flat on the carpet. For a second, she was pressed against him, the wool of her sweater scratching against his damp shirt. He smelled pine needles and vanilla soap. She smelled like a home. Clara pulled back quickly, stumbling a step, her hand flying to the wall to steady herself. Her eyes were wide, her face pale. "Mr. Valenti," she stammered, I didn't think you would be back. The roads are for people who follow traffic laws," Enzo said, his voice flat. He looked at the tree. It was pathetic, really small, crooked, decorated with cheap glass ornaments, and yet it was the only thing in the entire penthouse that didn't look dead. "I thought I told you no decorations." "It's in the corner," Clara said, her voice trembling but defensive. "You can't see it from the desk. It felt wrong to have nothing." Enzo stared at her. He wanted to tell her to take it down. He wanted to tell her that Christmas was a liability, a day when guards got drunk and enemies got bold. But the words died in his throat. He was so tired of the cold. "Fix the light," he said abruptly. He walked past her to the liquor cabinet, grabbing a bottle of 20-year-old scotch and 2 heavy crystal glasses. Clara watched him, uncertain. "Sir?" "Sit down," Enzo commanded, walking back to the seating area. He sank into the leather sofa, groaning softly as his back hit the cushion. He placed the glasses on the low coffee table and poured a generous measure into both. "I'm not drinking alone tonight, Clara, and I am tired of looking at my own reflection." Clara hesitated. This was a line, a bright, dangerous line. But she saw the slump of his shoulders, the way he rubbed his hand over his face. He looked human tonight. She walked over slowly, her limp more pronounced due to fatigue, and sat on the edge of the armchair, keeping a respectful distance. "Drink," Enzo said, pushing a glass toward her. "I don't drink on the job," she said softly. "You are not on the job. You are trapped in a blizzard with a man who has had a very bad day." Enzo took a long swallow of the amber liquid, the burn grounding him. "Besides, it is Christmas, or close enough." Clara reached for the glass. Her fingers brushed his as she took it. His skin was cold from the outside. Hers was warm. She took a small sip, coughing slightly at the potency of the alcohol. "It's awful out there," she said, and filling the silence. "The news said the power grid is straining." "The grid is old," Enzo muttered. "Like everything else in this city. It breaks when you push it." He looked at her over the rim of his glass. The alcohol was starting to soften the sharp edges of his mood, replacing the anger with a heavy, dangerous curiosity. "Why are you here, Clara? Any other maid would have stolen the silver and run home by noon. I needed the hours," she said simply, "and I don't have anywhere else to be. No boyfriend waiting with a ring? No parents waiting with a turkey." Clara looked down at her glass. "My parents are gone. It's just my brother, Evan, and he's studying for exams. He doesn't really do Christmas anymore either." "Why not?" Clara shifted in the chair. Her hand went to her skirt, fingers smoothing the fabric over her left thigh. It was a nervous tic he had seen 100 times. "We just don't, not since the accident." Enzo watched her hand. "The accident," he repeated. "The one that gave you the limp." Clara stiffened. She pulled her hand away, tucking it under her leg. "Yes, you never talk about it. There is nothing to talk about." She took another sip of whiskey, larger this time. "It was a long time ago. 3 years. 3 years is yesterday," Enzo said. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, the glass dangling loosely from his fingers. 3 years ago. I was burying a cousin. Time doesn't fix things. Clara, it just puts dust on them." "It puts distance," Clara countered, her voice gaining a sudden sharpness. "Distance helps." "Does it?" Enzo's eyes dropped to her leg again. She was doing it, shifting her weight, wincing, adjusting the hem of the skirt as if the fabric itself was hurting her. She was guarding that leg like it was made of gold or glass. A sudden, ugly flare of jealousy twisted in Enzo's gut. It was irrational, fueled by the whiskey and the stress of the day. He wondered who knew about the injury. He wondered who had seen what was under that skirt. Had a doctor touched her? A lover? Why was she so visceral in her protection of it, yet so fragile? He felt a need to break through her walls, to crack the composure she wore like armor. He wanted to know her pain because, in some twisted way, he felt she was the only one in the room who might understand his. "You are in pain," he said. It wasn't a question. "It's the cold," Clara said, her voice tight. "The pressure changes. It aches." "You hide it well. Mostly." Enzo swirled his drink. The amber liquid caught the light of the Christmas tree. "You hide everything well. Clara, you walk around this house like a ghost. You clean my messes. You play your sad music, and you hide inside those clothes." Clara set her glass down with a sharp clink. "I should go check the guest room windows. The wind might—" "Sit down," Enzo said. His voice wasn't loud, but it had the weight of iron. Clara froze halfway out of the chair, then slowly sank back down. Her face was flushed, her eyes bright with a mix of fear and defiance. Enzo watched her. He felt a reckless heat rising in his chest. He wanted to shake her. He wanted to touch her. He didn't know which one he wanted more. "You keep guarding that leg like it is a state secret," he murmured. A dark, teasing smile touched his lips, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Tell me, Clara, what are you protecting so fiercely? What's between your legs?" The words hung in the air, heavy and crude. They were beneath him. They were the words of a drunkard in a dive bar, not the head of the Valenti family, but they were out. Clara went rigid. The color drained from her face so fast it looked like she might faint. For a moment, there was only the sound of the wind screaming against the glass. Enzo saw the shock in her eyes, followed instantly by a wave of crushing shame. It wasn't the reaction of a woman who had been propositioned. It was the reaction of a woman who had been slapped. She looked physically sick. Her hands clenched into the fabric of her skirt so hard her knuckles turned white. "Is that what you think?" she whispered. Her voice broke. "You think I'm hiding? You think it's a game?" Enzo's smile faded. The silence was stretching too long, becoming something brittle. "Clara, you want to see?" she asked, her voice rising, trembling with a sudden, furious humiliation. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and angry. "You want to see what I'm guarding?" She stood up. She didn't look at his face. She looked at the wall, her jaw set in a hard line. With shaking hands, she reached down to the hem of her long wool skirt. Enzo felt a sudden pit open in his stomach. "Clara, stop, She didn't stop. She hauled the fabric up. It was not a seduction. It was a revelation of damage. She pulled the skirt up to her mid-thigh. Enzo's breath caught in his throat. There was no smooth skin. There was a cage. Her leg was encased in a heavy, industrial-looking brace made of black carbon fiber and steel hinges. It looked medieval. Straps dug into her pale flesh, holding the contraption in place. But it was what lay beneath the brace that stopped Enzo's heart. A scar, thick and jagged and purple, ran from her thigh down past her knee, disappearing into her boot. It was a roadmap of violence. The flesh was puckered and uneven, the mark of a wound that had been stitched together in haste and healed in agony. It was cruel. It was ugly. And it looked agonizingly painful. Clara stood there, holding her skirt up, trembling from head to foot. She was exposing her greatest shame, the ruin of her body, to the man she worked for. "A car crash," she said, her voice sounding hollow, detached. 3 Christmases ago. It was raining. We were coming back from a late shift." She swallowed hard, tears finally spilling over her lashes. "The car spun. The door crushed my leg. The metal went in. They said I would never walk. They said they should amputate." She looked down at the metal cage, her expression filled with self-loathing. "My best friend, Lena, she was driving. She didn't make it. The steering column..." She trailed off. "I survived, but I didn't come back whole. I'm broken, Enzo. That's what I'm hiding. That's what's between my legs. Metal and scars." She dropped the skirt. It fell back into place, hiding the horror, but the image was burned into Enzo's retinas. He sat frozen on the sofa. The glass of whiskey slipped from his fingers, tumbling to the thick carpet with a soft thud, spilling amber liquid like blood. He didn't notice. The shame of his question crashed into him with the force of a physical blow. He felt nauseous. He had asked her, he had insinuated, while she was carrying that. He looked at her standing there, shaking, waiting for his disgust, waiting for him to fire her or mock her. Enzo stood up. He moved slowly, as if approaching a wild animal caught in a trap. "Clara," he said. His voice was unrecognizable. It was rough. Broken, he reached out. She flinched, stepping back, expecting a blow or a grab, but Enzo sank to his knees. The boss of the Valenti family, the man who knelt for no one but God in his mother's grave, knelt on the carpet in front of his maid. He reached out with both hands, his movements hesitant, trembling slightly. He didn't touch her skin. He placed his hands gently on the outside of her skirt, right over the metal hinges of the brace. He could feel the cold hardness of the steel through the wool. He could feel the heat of her leg beneath it. "I'm sorry," he whispered. He looked up at her, his dark eyes wide and unguarded, filled with a profound, shattering regret. "Clara, I am so sorry." Clara looked down at him, stunned. Her breath hitched in broken sobs. "It's ugly," she choked out. "I know it's ugly." "No," Enzo said fiercely. He moved his hands, tracing the line of the scar through the fabric, his touch reverent, as if he were handling a holy relic. "No, I have seen ugly things. I have seen men die screaming for nothing. I have seen cowards live in palaces." He rested his forehead briefly against her knee. just above the brace. This is not ugly. This is survival. You stand on this leg every day. You climb my stairs. You carry this weight. He looked up again, his gaze locking with hers. The air in the room shifted, the shame evaporated, replaced by a thick electric tension that hummed in the silence. It wasn't the dark, possessive desire from before. It was something deeper, heavier. It was recognition. "You are the strongest thing in this city," Enzo said softly. Clara stared at him, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break her ribs. She saw the man beneath the monster. She saw the vulnerability he hid from the world, laid bare at her feet. She reached out, her hand trembling, and touched his hair. It was soft. Enzo leaned into her touch, closing his eyes. For a moment, they were just two broken people in a storm, anchored to each other by a shared understanding of pain. Enzo stood up slowly, his hand sliding down to hold hers. He pulled her a step closer. The distance between them vanished. He was looking at her mouth, not with a leer, but with a desperate kind of hunger, a need to be close to the warmth she offered. "Clara," he breathed. He leaned in. She tilted her head up, her eyes fluttering shut. The world narrowed down to the warmth of his breath on her cheek, the scent of whiskey and snow. And then the world went black. The power cut out with a deafening click. The lights on the Christmas tree died. The lamps flickered and vanished. The penthouse was plunged into absolute, suffocating darkness, leaving them standing in the void, holding onto each other as the wind howled outside. The darkness was absolute. One moment, the penthouse had been a warm, golden cage filled with the scent of pine and whiskey, the air vibrating with the electric pull of a kiss that was years in the making. The next, the world simply vanished. The heavy click of the power grid failing was followed by a silence so profound it felt like the building itself was holding its breath. Clara gasped. The sound sharp and terrified in the sudden void. Instinct overrode shame. She reached out blindly, her hands finding the solid wool of Enzo's coat. "Enzo," she whispered, her voice trembling. He was already moving. He didn't pull away. Instead, his hands found her waist, gripping her firmly, anchoring her in the pitch black for a heartbeat. They stood frozen, bodies pressed flush against each other, the heat of him seeping through her sweater. In the dark, the difference in their stations, boss and maid, predator and prey, evaporated. They were just two heartbeats accelerating in the dark. Then, a harsh buzz cut through the silence. Enzo's phone vibrated against his hip. The screen flared to life, casting a ghostly blue pallor over his face. The tenderness that had been there seconds ago, the raw vulnerability of a man on his knees, was wiped away instantly. His features hardened into stone. His eyes, scanning the text message, went cold and flat. "What is it?" Clara asked, her hands still clutching his arms. Enzo didn't answer immediately. He typed a single-letter response and shoved the phone back into his pocket, plunging them into semi-darkness again. The only illumination now came from the floor-to-ceiling windows, where the faint, snow-blurred glow of the city below offered a jagged gray light. "The grid is down," Enzo said, his voice low and devoid of emotion. "But the backup generator did not kick in. That means the line was cut." Clara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. "Cut by the storm?" "No," Enzo said. He pulled away from her, breaking the contact, and the loss of his warmth was a physical ache. "By a pair of wire cutters. We are not alone. Clara." He reached out and grabbed her hand. His grip was not gentle this time. It was urgent, bordering on painful. "Move, now." He pulled her away from the living room, away from the Christmas tree that was now just a shadow in the corner. He moved with a terrifying familiarity, knowing exactly where the furniture was, navigating the layout of his fortress by memory. Clara stumbled, her brace locking and clicking as she tried to match his long strides. "Enzo, wait. My leg." "I know," he hissed, not slowing down. He shifted his grip, moving one hand to the small of her back to steady her while keeping her moving forward. "Stay behind me. Use the wall. Do not let go of my jacket." They moved into the hallway. It was a tunnel of shadows. The wind howled against the glass exterior of the building, a banshee scream that masked the sound of their footsteps. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. She was blind, limping, and being dragged into the depths of a penthouse that had suddenly transformed from a home into a hunting ground. Enzo stopped abruptly near a large, abstract painting halfway down the corridor. He released her for a second. Clara heard the sound of a frame sliding, followed by the beep of a digital keypad. A section of the wall hissed open. A faint red emergency light bathed the small alcove, casting long, bloody shadows across Enzo's face. Clara stared, her eyes adjusting to the crimson gloom. It was a hidden armory. Neatly arranged on racks were handguns, long rifles, stacks of currency bound in plastic, and a row of passports. Enzo reached in and grabbed a heavy, matte black pistol. He checked the magazine with a fluid, practiced motion that made Clara's stomach turn. This was not the man who had paid for a veteran's surgery. This was the man who burned warehouses. "The generator override is in the basement," Enzo muttered, tucking a spare magazine into his pocket. "They cut the feed to force the electronic locks on the service entrance. They are already inside." He turned to her, his face grim in the red light. "Listen to me closely. There is a service elevator behind the kitchen pantry. It runs on an independent battery. It goes down to the garage. I want you to get in it." "What?" Clara shook her head, backing away. "No. Clara, do not argue with me." Enzo snapped. The anger in his voice was brittle. Underneath it, she heard a jagged edge of fear. "Take the car in spot 4. The keys are in the wheel well. Go to the police precinct on 4th Street. Tell them nothing except that you heard shots." "And leave you?" Clara asked, her voice rising. "If they are in the building, they could be in the garage too. You are trying to put me in a metal box and send me downstairs to waiting gunmen." Enzo froze. He looked at her, his jaw clenching. He knew she was right. If this was a coordinated hit, the exits would be covered. But the thought of keeping her here, in the crossfire, made his blood run cold. "I can't run." "Enzo," Clara said, her voice shaking but her chin lifted high, "and I won't hide in a dark hole waiting to hear if you are dead. I have lived with fear every day for 3 years. I am not going to die cowering." A sound echoed from the far end of the penthouse, the distinct, heavy thud of a boot hitting the floorboards, then the click of a door latch. They were on the floor. Enzo cursed softly, a vile word in Italian. He looked at Clara, really looked at her, seeing the terror in her eyes but also the steel in her spine. He realized then that he had no choice. He could not protect her by sending her away. He could only protect her by keeping her close. He reached into the safe and pulled out a smaller handgun, a compact 9mm. He grabbed her hand and pressed the cold steel into her palm. "Take it," he commanded. Clara looked down at the weapon. It was heavy, heavier than it looked in movies. Her fingers trembled as they curled around the grip. "Do you know how to use this?" Enzo asked, his voice a harsh whisper. "Safety is on the side. Point and pull. It will kick." Clara took a breath, her thumb finding the safety switch. She didn't flick it off, but she rested her thumb on it, her index finger indexing along the slide, away from the trigger. Her stance shifted, her weight settling more evenly despite the brace. "I know," she whispered. "After the crash, after I couldn't run anymore, I took a course, a community security class for women. I learned how to shoot." Enzo stared at her. The revelation hit him with the force of a physical blow. She had prepared for this. The woman he thought was fragile, the woman who polished his silver and flinched at loud noises, had learned to kill because the world had already tried to break her once. A new kind of respect flickered in his eyes, warring with the terror of the situation. He nodded once, a sharp, decisive movement. "Good," he said. "Stay on my hip. If you see anyone who is not me, you shoot. You do not hesitate. You shoot until they stop moving." He hit the panel, and the wall slid shut, sealing the armory and cutting off the red light. They were back in the gray shadows. "Move," Enzo breathed. They moved through the hallway like phantoms. Enzo took the lead, his weapon raised, his body tense as a coiled spring. Clara followed, her heart thundering in her ears like a war drum. Her brace clicked softly. clack, step, clack, step. A rhythmic liability in the silence. They reached the intersection where the hallway opened into the vast living area. Enzo pressed his back against the wall, signaling her to stop. He used the reflection in a decorative mirror on the opposite wall to peer around the corner. 3 shapes were moving through the living room. They were professional, silent, wearing tactical gear and night vision goggles. The green lasers from their rifles sliced through the gloom, dancing over the furniture Clara had dusted that morning. 3, Enzo whispered, his lips barely moving. Spread out. They are sweeping toward the bedroom. What do we do? Clara breathed, her grip on the gun slippery with sweat. We flank them, Enzo said. I will draw their fire to the kitchen island. You stay in the doorway. If they try to circle back, you stop them. Enzo, go. Enzo moved. He didn't just step out, he exploded into motion. He fired 2 shots in rapid succession, the deafening crack-crack shattering the silence. One of the shadows in the living room crumpled. Chaos erupted, the remaining 2 intruders spun, their suppressed rifles spitting fire. Bullets tore into the drywall inches from Enzo's head as he dove behind the marble kitchen island. Glass shattered. The expensive vase on the mantelpiece exploded into dust. Clara stood in the doorway, shaking. The noise was deafening, disorienting. She saw the muzzle flashes, saw the green lasers cutting through the dust in the air. One of the men broke away from the suppression fire on the kitchen and started moving toward the hallway, toward her. He was moving fast, low to the ground. Clara raised the gun. Her hands were shaking so badly she couldn't align the sights. Breathe, she told herself. Just like the range. Front sight, squeeze. She fired. The recoil jerked her arms up. The bullet went wide, smashing into the plaster ceiling. But the noise was enough to make the attacker hesitate. He spun toward her, raising his rifle. Clara scrambled back, trying to retreat into the corridor. Her foot landed on a shard of the broken vase. Smooth leather met slick glass. Her bad leg went out from under her. She didn't just fall, she collapsed, her brace locking at an awkward angle as she hit the floor hard. The gun skittered out of her hand, sliding across the polished wood floor into the darkness. "Clara!" Enzo roared from the kitchen, pinned down by the second gunman. The attacker in the hallway saw her fall. He didn't shoot immediately. He saw an unarmed woman on the ground and moved to close the distance, likely intending to use her as a hostage to force Enzo out. He loomed over her, a dark silhouette against the gray window light. He reached down, grabbing a handful of her sweater to haul her up. "Get up," he growled, his voice distorted by a mask. Clara was on her back, pain radiating from her hip. She looked at the gun in his hand, then up at his masked face. Fear, hot and white, flooded her veins. But beneath the fear was rage, the same rage that had made her walk when doctors said she wouldn't, the same rage that made her learn to shoot. "I am not broken." As he pulled her up, Clara didn't struggle against his grip. Instead, she used his momentum. She chambered her right leg, the good one, and planted her foot on the floor. Then, with a scream of effort, she swung her left leg, the heavy, metal-encased leg, upward in a vicious arc. The carbon fiber and steel brace, weighing nearly 5 pounds and hard as a crowbar, slammed into the side of the man's knee. There was a sickening crunch of bone. The man howled, a sound of pure agony, and his leg buckled sideways. He collapsed on top of her, his rifle clattering away. Clara didn't stop. She shoved his heaving weight off her, scrambling backward on her elbows. A single shot rang out from the kitchen. The second gunman stopped firing. Enzo appeared at the end of the hallway. He saw the man writhing on the floor, clutching his shattered knee, and Clara crab-walking away from him. Enzo didn't hesitate. He walked up to the man on the floor and fired one clean shot. The man stopped moving. Silence rushed back into the room, ringing in Clara's ears. Enzo dropped to his knees beside her. He was breathing hard. A shallow, ragged sound. There was a cut on his cheekbone, bleeding freely, and his shirt was covered in plaster dust. "Clara!" he choked out. He ran his hands over her arms, her face, checking for bullet holes. "Are you hit? Did he shoot you?" "No," she gasped, her chest heaving. She looked at the dead man, Then at her own leg, the brace was scuffed, but intact. I hit him with the brace. Enzo looked at the man's leg, which was bent at an impossible angle, and then back at Clara. His eyes were wide, dark pools of shock and adrenaline. He grabbed her face in both hands, his bloody fingers staining her skin. "You are incredible," he whispered fiercely. "You are—" He didn't finish. He pulled her into him, crushing her against his chest. Clara buried her face in his neck, smelling the cordite and the sweat, her hands gripping his shirt so hard her nails tore the fabric. They stayed there for 10 seconds, leaning against the wall, surrounded by glass and death, breathing the same air. Then Enzo pulled back. The soldier was back in charge. "We have to go," he said, helping her stand. She winced, putting weight on the leg, but nodded. "The police will be here in 3 minutes. My men will be here in 5. But this place is dead." He looked around the penthouse, his sanctuary. It was violated now. They knew where he slept. They knew the codes. And most dangerously, they knew about her. "Where are we going?" Clara asked, limping as he guided her toward the service exit. "Somewhere they cannot find us," Enzo said. "I'm not leaving you. Clara, not now. Not ever." The city was a graveyard of white. The snow had not stopped. It had intensified, burying the streets in 2 feet of drift. Enzo's car, a nondescript SUV he kept for emergencies, cut through the slush, the 4-wheel drive fighting for traction. He drove with one hand on the wheel, his knuckles white. His other hand rested on the center console, close enough to brush Clara's arm, as if he needed to constantly reassure himself she was still there. Clara sat in the passenger seat, staring out at the passing streetlights. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a cold, shaking shock. She looked down at her hands. They were clean, but they felt dirty. She had tried to kill a man tonight, and she had succeeded in crippling one. "You have a safe house," she said quietly. Her voice sounded loud in the confined space of the car. "I have several," Enzo replied, his eyes scanning the mirrors. "But we are going to the one in Northwood. It is off the books. No one knows about it except me. Is that where you take all your maids?" The question was sharp, bitter. It came from the fear. She needed to push him, to remind herself of who he was. Enzo glanced at her, his expression tightening. "Do not do that." "Do what?" Clara turned to him. "Pretend that this is normal? Pretend that I didn't just watch you execute a man in your hallway? Enzo, you are a mob boss. I am a cleaner. This morning I was worrying about textbook prices. Tonight I am fleeing a crime scene." "I know," Enzo said. "I know who I am. Clara, I have never lied to you about that. But you brought me into it," she accused, tears stinging her eyes again. "You kissed me. You made me. You made me care. And now I'm in the car with a gun in my lap." Enzo slammed on the brakes as a snowplow rumbled past an intersection. The car skidded slightly before correcting. He turned to face her, the engine idling rough in the cold. "I did not bring you into this," he said, his voice low and intense. "They brought you into this when they broke down my door. But I am getting you out of it. I am taking you somewhere safe. I will burn down this entire city before I let them touch you again." "Why?" Clara demanded. "Because I'm your employee? Because I'm a liability? Because you are mine!" The shout filled the car. Enzo looked shocked that he had said it. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Clara stared at him. "Yours?" she whispered. "Is that what I am? Something you own? Like the penthouse? Like the guns?" Enzo looked away, staring out the windshield at the falling snow. His jaw worked, the muscle ticking in his cheek. He gripped the steering wheel so hard the leather creaked. He thought of her standing in the dark, lifting her skirt to show him her scars. He thought of her on the floor, using the symbol of her pain to break a man's leg to save herself. He thought of the way she had felt in his arms, the only warm thing in a cold world. "No," he said finally. His voice was quiet now, stripped of the anger. "Not like the guns, not like the house." He reached out, his hand covering hers on the console. His fingers were rough, warm and trembling slightly. "I have done terrible things. Clara," he said, "I have hurt people. I have stolen, I have killed. I do not apologize for protecting my life, but I am not protecting you because I own you." He turned to look at her, his dark eyes burning with a terrified, desperate intensity. "I'm protecting you because if something happens to you, I do not think I will survive it." Clara looked at him, her breath catching in her throat. It wasn't a declaration of love, it was a confession of dependency. He was telling her that she had become his weakness. "Enzo," she breathed. He didn't answer. He squeezed her hand once, hard, then put the car back in gear. As they drove into the blinding white of the storm, heading toward a house that didn't exist on any map, Clara didn't pull her hand away. She let him hold it. She was terrified of him. She was terrified of his world. But as the heater hummed and the city faded behind them, she realized with a sinking heart that she felt safer in this car, next to this dangerous man, than she had ever felt anywhere else. He wasn't just protecting what was his. He was protecting the only part of himself that was still human. And she was it. The safe house was a lie of a home, located on the northern edge of Harborview, where the paved roads gave way to gravel and dense pine forests. It looked like any other townhouse in a row of modest, forgettable structures. It had beige siding, a small porch that needed painting, and a wreath on the door that had likely been there for 5 years. But inside, the walls were reinforced with steel, the windows were bulletproof glass disguised as standard double panes, and the pantry was stocked with enough non-perishable food to last a siege of 2 months. It was a cage, but it was a warm one. Enzo locked the heavy deadbolt behind them, the sound echoing in the small entryway. The space was shockingly intimate compared to the sprawling emptiness of the penthouse. There was a single living area with a worn brown couch, a kitchenette that forced 2 people to maneuver around each other like dancers, and one bedroom with a queen-sized bed. Clara stood in the center of the living room, still clutching her coat. She looked small against the backdrop of the unfamiliar room. Her face was pale, her eyes dark with exhaustion and the lingering shock of the violence she had just survived. She leaned heavily on her left leg, the brace stiff beneath her skirt. "There is one bed," Enzo said, his voice rough. He was checking the security feed on a tablet he had pulled from a hidden panel near the thermostat. "You take it. I will take the couch." "Enzo, you're bleeding," Clara said softly. He touched his cheekbone. The blood had dried to a dark crust. "It is a scratch. Go to sleep. Clara, we are safe here. No one knows this address, not even Marco." She hesitated, looking at him. She wanted to say something. Thank you, perhaps, or maybe just ask him why he was doing this. But the words caught in her throat. She simply nodded and disappeared into the bedroom, closing the door with a soft click. Enzo did not sleep. He sat on the couch in the dark, his gun resting on the coffee table next to a glass of tap water. He watched the snowy street through the blinds, his mind a whirlwind of strategy and guilt. He had exposed her. He had put a gun in her hand, and he had knelt before her and touched the source of her deepest shame. The hours dragged on. The silence of the house was different from the penthouse. It was not empty. It was heavy with the presence of the woman in the next room. Sometime around 3 a.m, a sound cut through the quiet. It was a cry, sharp, terrified, and strangled. Enzo was moving before he was fully conscious of making the decision. He grabbed his weapon, checked the safety, and burst into the bedroom. The room was dim, lit only by the street lamp filtering through the curtains. Clara was thrashing in the bed, the sheets tangled around her legs. She was sobbing in her sleep, a high, keening sound of pure distress. "No," she moaned, her hands clawing at the mattress. "Lena, watch out! The car! The car!" Enzo holstered the gun and crossed the room. He sat on the edge of the bed. "Clara," he said firmly. She didn't wake. She curled into a ball, clutching her left leg, her fingers digging into the flesh above the knee as if trying to hold herself together. "It burns," she whimpered. "Please, it burns." Enzo's heart twisted. He reached out and took her by the shoulders, his grip firm but gentle. "Clara, wake up. You are dreaming." She gasped, her eyes flying open. She stared at him blindly for a second, the terror of the nightmare still glazing her gaze. Then she saw him, really saw him, and the tension rushed out of her body, replaced by a racking sob. "Enzo," she whispered. She sat up, shaking violently. She reached for him, needing an anchor. He pulled her into his arms. It wasn't sexual. It was the desperate, human need to comfort. She buried her face in the crook of his neck, wetting his shirt with tears. He held her, one hand rubbing circles on her back, the other stroking her hair. He felt the tremors running through her frame, the way her breath hitched in her chest. "I'm here," he murmured against her hair. "You are safe. The fire is not real." They sat like that for a long time, until her breathing slowed and the shaking subsided to a tremble. Clara pulled back slightly, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. She looked young in the dim light, stripped of her defenses. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "The crash. I dream about it sometimes. When I am stressed." "You have had a stressful night," Enzo said dryly. He handed her a tissue from the box on the nightstand. "Do you want to talk about it?" Clara looked at her hands. "I told you it was a crash, but I didn't tell you how it happened." Enzo went still. He didn't want to know, and yet he needed to know. "Tell me." "It was Christmas Eve," she began, her voice hollow. 3 years ago, Lena and I were driving back from the mall. We had picked up extra shifts to pay for gifts. It was raining hard. We were near the docks, taking the shortcut to the highway." She took a shuddering breath. A black sedan came out of nowhere. It was flying, doing 80 in a 30 zone. It clipped us. We spun out. I remember the sound of tires screaming. And then, gunfire. Popping sounds, like firecrackers. Enzo felt a cold sensation spread through his chest, freezing his blood. "The police said it was a gang-related incident," Clara continued, staring at the wall. "They said the sedan was chasing someone or running from someone. They never found the driver. They just wrote it off as an unsolved case. Collateral damage." She looked up at him, her eyes shining with a fresh wave of grief. "Lena died instantly. The steering column crushed her chest. I was trapped in the wreckage for 2 hours while they cut the door off my leg. I could hear the sirens, but they felt so far away." Enzo sat frozen. His face remained a mask of calm, but inside, the world was tilting on its axis. He remembered that night. He remembered it with perfect, agonizing clarity. It was 3 years ago. He'd been younger, hungrier, more reckless. A rival lieutenant had stolen a shipment of narcotics. Enzo had given the order to his enforcers. "Get him. I don't care where he goes. Run him down." He remembered the report the next morning. Target eliminated near the docks. Minor civilian involvement, no witnesses. Minor civilian involvement. The phrase had been a line on a piece of paper. A cost of doing business. Now, that cost was sitting in front of him, trembling in a t-shirt, with a scarred leg and a dead best friend. He was the architect of her ruin. The guilt hit him like a physical blow, heavier than any bullet. He wanted to vomit. He wanted to fall to his knees and beg for her forgiveness. But he couldn't. If he told her the truth now, in this room, she would look at him with hatred. She would run, and if she ran, the men hunting them would kill her. So he swallowed the bile. He swallowed the truth. He buried it deep, under layers of necessity. "You survived," Enzo said. His voice was thick, rasping. "You survived something that would have broken anyone else." "I didn't," Clara whispered. "I'm broken. Enzo, you saw?" "I saw a woman who kicked a gunman with a shattered leg," Enzo said fiercely. He took her face in his hands, forcing her to look at him. "I see a woman who wakes up every morning knowing exactly how cruel the world can be, and yet she still insists on buying a Christmas tree. I see a woman who is stronger than I will ever be." Clara searched his face, seeing the raw emotion there. She didn't see the guilt. She saw only admiration. It made her chest ache. "You really believe that?" she asked softly. "I know it," Enzo said. "Now sleep. I will be right outside." He left the room before he could break. He went back to the couch and stared at the ceiling until dawn, the weight of his secret pressing down on him like a tombstone. The days that followed were a strange, suspended reality. The snow continued to fall, sealing them into the townhouse. They were trapped in a domestic bubble that felt both fragile and inevitable. Enzo spent hours on his encrypted laptop, coordinating with Marco, hunting for the mole, issuing orders to secure the city. But when the laptop was closed, he was just a man living in a small space with a woman he could not stop watching. The intimacy of the safe house was suffocating in the best possible way. There was no staff to hide behind, no sprawling hallways to separate them. They cooked together. It became a ritual. Enzo, it turned out, could cook. He made pasta sauce from scratch using the canned tomatoes in the pantry, chopping garlic with a precision that was almost meditative. Clara moved around him in the tiny kitchen. The space was so narrow that they had to choreograph their movements. "Excuse me," she would say. Reaching for the salt, Enzo would shift, pressing his back against the counter to let her pass. Her skirt would brush against his legs. The scent of her vanilla soap would fill his senses. One evening, she was stirring a pot of soup at the stove. She shifted her weight, and her bad leg gave a slight buckle, fatigue setting in. Enzo was there instantly. His hand shot out, gripping her waist to steady her. "Careful," he murmured. He didn't let go immediately. He stood behind her, his hand warm and large on the curve of her hip. Clara went still. She could feel the heat of his chest against her back. She could feel his breath stirring the hair at the nape of her neck. For a moment, neither of them moved. The only sound was the bubbling of the soup and the wind outside. The air between them crackled with an unspoken hunger, a magnetic pull that terrified Clara as much as it compelled her. Then Enzo stepped back, clearing his throat. "Sit down," he said gruffly. "I will finish this." Clara sat at the small table, watching him. Her heart was racing. They were dancing on the edge of a cliff, and the ground was crumbling. The tension broke 2 nights later. It started as a minor disagreement. Clara was pacing the living room, her limp pronounced. She'd been cooped up for 4 days. "I need to call Evan," she said. "He thinks I'm at the estate. He will worry if I don't check in. I told you," Enzo said from the couch, not looking up from his files. "No outgoing calls. The signal can be triangulated." "Then let me go to the payphone down the street," Clara insisted. "It's 2 blocks away. I can wear a hat." "No," Enzo said. "You do not leave this house." "I am not a prisoner." "Enzo," Clara snapped. She stopped pacing and turned to face him. "I get that people are after you, but Evan is my brother. He's all I have. I need to know he is okay." "He is fine," Enzo said, his voice rising. "I have men watching his apartment. If anything happens, I will know." "Men watching him?" Clara looked horrified. "You have people stalking my brother?" "I have people protecting your brother." Enzo stood up, tossing the file onto the table. "Because if they can't get to you, they will go for him. Do you not understand what is happening, Clara? These people kill families to send a message. Then let me go." Clara yelled. "If I am the target, let me leave. I'll go to the police. I'll go to another state. But I can't stay here hiding behind your guns while you treat me like a piece of property you're trying to hoard." "Property?" Enzo laughed, a dark, humorless sound. He crossed the room in 3 strides, crowding her against the kitchen counter. "You think that is what this is? You think I am keeping you here because I want to own you?" "Yes," Clara cried, backing up until her hips hit the edge of the granite. "You control everything, the food, the lights, the doors. You control me. I am keeping you here because I am terrified," Enzo roared. He slammed his hands onto the counter on either side of her, trapping her. The noise made Clara jump. She stared up at him, her eyes wide. Enzo was breathing hard, his chest heaving. His face was inches from hers. The anger in his eyes was blazing, but beneath it, there was something else, something raw and desperate. "I am terrified," he repeated, his voice dropping to a rough whisper. "Every time I look at the door, I picture them coming through it. I picture you on the floor again, and I cannot breathe. Clara, I cannot breathe when I think about you getting hurt." The silence that followed was deafening. Clara stared at him. She saw the lines of exhaustion around his eyes. She saw the fear that a man like him should never admit to. "Enzo," she breathed. The anger drained out of her, replaced by a sudden, overwhelming surge of emotion. She realized that he wasn't keeping her prisoner. He was standing between her and the abyss, using his own body as a shield. Enzo looked at her. His gaze dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes. The air in the kitchen grew heavy, charged with the electricity that had been building for days. He didn't move away. He leaned in closer. "Do not look at me like that," he warned, his voice shaking. "Like what?" Clara whispered. "Like you forgive me," he said. "Like you want me to stay?" Clara didn't answer with words. She reached up, her hand trembling, and touched his jaw. Her thumb brushed over the rough stubble, tracing the line of his cheekbone where the cut was healing. Enzo made a sound deep in his throat, half groan, half surrender. He lowered his head. He gave her a chance to push him away. He waited until their breath mingled. Clara didn't push him away. She leaned forward, closing the final inch. Their lips met. It wasn't a movie kiss. It wasn't smooth. It was a collision. It was slow and hesitant at first, a testing of boundaries, a question asked in the dark. But the moment their lips touched, the dam broke. Enzo groaned and buried his hands in her hair. Tilting her head back, the kiss deepened, becoming desperate. It tasted of coffee and pent-up longing. It was the taste of two lonely people finally finding a place to rest. Clara clutched his shirt, twisting the fabric in her fists. She pulled him closer, her body arching into his, for the first time in 3 years. She wasn't thinking about her leg. She wasn't thinking about the pain. She was thinking about the heat of his hands, the strength of his chest, the way he made her feel whole. He kissed her like he was drowning and she was air. He kissed her with a reverence that made her knees weak. They broke apart, gasping for breath, foreheads resting against each other. Enzo's hands were still in her hair, his thumbs stroking her temples. "This is wrong," Clara whispered, her eyes closed. "You are my boss. You are dangerous." "I know," Enzo rasped. "I am the worst thing that could happen to you. We can't do this," she said, opening her eyes. "There are rules, lines." Enzo looked at her. His eyes were dark, burning with a resolve that frightened her. "Then the rules are gone," he said. "You are fired. Clara." Clara blinked, stunned. "What?" "I fire you," Enzo said, his voice dropping to a husky growl. "You are not my maid anymore. You are not my employee." He brushed a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch searing. "You are just Clara," he said, "and I am just a man who has wanted to do this since the moment I saw you standing on that step stool." The admission sent a thrill through her that chased away the last of the fear. She looked at him, seeing the vulnerability he was offering her. He was giving up his authority to give her a choice. "Okay," she whispered. A small, tearful laugh escaped her. "Okay, I'm fired." Enzo didn't smile. He looked at her with an intensity that made her shiver. "Then tell me to stop," he said. "Tell me to walk away, and I will sleep on the floor." Clara looked at the bedroom door, then back at him. She thought about the cold, lonely nights in her apartment. She thought about the scars on her leg and the scars on his soul. "Don't stop," she said softly. Enzo swept her up into his arms. He didn't struggle with her weight. He held her high against his chest, careful of her leg, treating her like she was precious glass that he had been entrusted to carry. He carried her into the bedroom and kicked the door shut. The rest of the night was not about lust. It was about reclamation. They undressed in the dark, fumbling and eager. When Enzo finally laid her on the bed, he didn't recoil from the brace. He unstrapped it with gentle, steady hands, placing it on the floor. He kissed the scar, the ugly, jagged line that she hated, with a tenderness that made her weep silent tears. "Beautiful," he whispered against her skin. He loved her with a slow, deliberate focus, worshipping her body as if to apologize for every moment of pain she had ever endured. He made her feel not broken, but remade. And Clara, for her part, held him. She ran her hands over the scars on his back, the bullet wounds and knife marks of his violent life. She kissed the tension from his jaw. She offered him the forgiveness he couldn't ask for. They fell asleep tangled together, limbs woven into a knot that defied untying. When morning came, the gray winter light filtered through the curtains. Clara woke first. She felt the heavy weight of Enzo's arm across her waist, holding her even in sleep. His face was buried in her shoulder, his breathing deep and even. She lay there, listening to the silence of the snow-covered world outside. She knew that they were still in danger. She knew the men with guns were still hunting them. She knew that he was a criminal and she was an unemployed maid with a crippled leg. But as she looked at the man sleeping beside her, Clara realized with a terrifying certainty that she had never felt safer in her entire life. She pressed a soft kiss to his forehead, closed her eyes, and let herself believe, just for a moment, that this was forever. The winter sun that filtered through the blinds of the safe house was pale and thin, casting stripes of gray light across the duvet. Clara woke slowly, pulled from sleep by the unfamiliar weight of an arm draped across her waist. For a moment, in the haze between dreaming and waking, she panicked, her body tensed, her instinct screaming that she was trapped. Then she felt the steady, rhythmic warmth of breath against the back of her neck, and the memories of the night before rushed in. The whiskey, the confession, the desperate, healing way he had touched her scars. She lay still, staring at the forearm resting on the white sheet. It was thick with muscle, dusted with dark hair, and marked with ink. A tattoo of a serpent coiled around a dagger sat on the inside of his wrist, a symbol of violence etched permanently into his skin. Beside the ink were smaller, white lines on his knuckles, scars from fights, scars from breaking things. Clara traced the line of the tattoo with her gaze. She had crossed a line. She had slept with Lorenzo Valenti. She had let the monster into her bed, and worse, she had found comfort there. A thread of anxiety pulled tight in her chest. It was easy to forget who he was in the dark, when he was whispering apologies against her skin. But in the cold light of morning, the reality was stark. He was a man who burned warehouses and shot people in hallways, and she was... what? His lover? His absolution? Enzo stirred, his arm tightened around her instinctively, pulling her flush against his chest. He murmured something unintelligible in Italian, his voice rough with sleep, and buried his face in her hair. "Morning," he rasped. Clara turned in his arms. He looked younger in sleep. The harsh lines of his face softened, but as his eyes opened, the alertness returned instantly. The soldier was back. "Morning," she whispered. He studied her face, searching for regret. When he didn't find it, a rare, genuine smile touched his lips. He leaned in and kissed her, soft and slow. It felt domestic. It felt terrifyingly normal. "Stay," he said, pulling back. "Do not get up. Your leg needs rest." "I have to make coffee," she said, though she made no move to rise. "I will make coffee," Enzo said. He threw the covers back and stood up. He was unself-conscious in his nakedness for a moment before pulling on a pair of sweatpants. "And breakfast. You stay." Clara watched him leave the room. She pulled the sheet up to her chin, her heart doing a traitorous flutter. She should be running. She should be terrified. Instead, she was wondering if he took sugar. Enzo was surprisingly competent in the kitchen. When Clara finally emerged, dressed in one of his oversized shirts and her skirt, the smell of brewing coffee and frying bacon filled the small townhouse. He had set the small table. He pulled out a chair for her, his hand lingering on her shoulder as she sat. "Eat," he commanded, placing a plate of eggs and toast in front of her. "You are too thin. You sound like my grandmother," Clara said, picking up a fork. "Your grandmother was a wise woman." Enzo sat opposite her with a black coffee. He looked at her, his expression serious. "I need to make a call. To your brother." Clara froze, her fork halfway to her mouth. "Evan, why?" "Because he thinks you're at the estate, but you have been radio silent for 4 days. He'll be asking questions. We need to manage the narrative." Enzo placed his encrypted phone on the table. "I will put it on speaker. You stay quiet." He dialed. Clara held her breath. "Hello?" Evan's voice came through, sounding tired and young. "Evan Hayes?" Enzo asked. His voice shifted effortlessly into a professional, slightly bored tone. This is Mr. Rossi, the estate manager for the Obsidian Tower. Oh, hi. Is Clara okay? She hasn't answered her texts. Your sister is fine, Enzo said smoothly. We have had a security system upgrade at the main property, which has interfered with cell reception for the staff. She asked me to call you to let you know she is working double shifts through the holiday to cover the event schedule. Oh, Evan sounded relieved. Okay, that makes sense. She works too hard. She is a valued employee, Enzo said, his eyes locking with Clara's across the table. Actually, as part of our holiday bonus program, the Valenti Corporation settles outstanding educational debts for senior staff families. I have transferred $7,000 to your university bursar account this morning. The receipt should be in your email. Clara dropped her fork. It clattered loudly against the plate. What? Evan stammered. 7,000, sir. That's... I don't know what to say. Say thank you to your sister when you see her, Enzo said. Good day, mister. Hayes. He hung up. Clara stared at him. You paid his tuition? It was a loose end, Enzo said, shrugging. He took a sip of coffee, avoiding her gaze. Debt makes people desperate. I do not want him desperate. Enzo, Clara said softly. Tears pricked her eyes. It was a gesture of immense power, yes, but also of care. He was protecting the only thing that mattered to her. Thank you. Enzo looked at her then, and the mask slipped. I told you, Clara, I take care of what is mine. His phone buzzed again, a sharp, double vibration. Enzo glanced at the screen. It was a message from Marco. The subject line read, Operation Black Tide, Archive Retrieval, Urgent. Excuse me, Enzo said. His voice went tight. I need to take this. He stood up and walked into the small bathroom, locking the door behind him. The bathroom was cramped, smelling of lemon cleaner and damp towels. Enzo sat on the edge of the tub and opened the file. Marco had been thorough. Enzo had asked him to dig into the accident report from 3 years ago, driven by a gnawing suspicion after Clara's nightmare. He had hoped to be wrong. He had hoped it was a coincidence. He scrolled through the PDF. Date, December 24th, 2 years prior. Location, Harborview Docks, Sector 4. Incident, vehicular pursuit involving Valenti assets and Castillo enforcers. Casualties, 1 civilian fatality, Lena Vance. 1 civilian critical injury, Clara Hayes. Enzo stopped breathing. The air in the bathroom seemed to vanish. He read the ballistics report. Stray round, 9mm. Matched to Valenti standard issue. Bullet struck the rear driver's side tire of a gray Honda Civic. Vehicle lost control and collided with a concrete pylon. Enzo stared at the screen. The letters blurred. He remembered the order. He had been sitting in his office, drinking scotch. Angry about a stolen shipment, he had shouted into the phone, I don't care if you have to shoot the tires out. Stop them! He'd given the order. His men had shot the tires out, not of the rival car, but of a Honda Civic that was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Enzo dropped the phone on the bath mat. He gripped the edge of the porcelain sink, his knuckles turning white as he leaned over, fighting the sudden urge to retch. He looked at his reflection in the mirror. The face staring back was not a lover. It was not a protector. It was a murderer. Clara was in the kitchen, eating the eggs he had cooked for her. She was wearing his shirt. She had kissed him. She had told him he was worth saving, and he was the reason her best friend was dead. He was the reason she had a cage of metal on her leg. He was the reason she woke up screaming in the night. A wave of self-loathing so profound it nearly brought him to his knees, crashed over him. He had seduced her. He had made her trust him. And the whole time, her blood was on his hands. He could bury it. The thought seduced him for a second. Marco would never talk. The file could be deleted. Clara would never know. They could leave this city, start over, and he could spend the rest of his life making it up to her, loving her enough to cover the cracks. But then he remembered her eyes when she showed him the scar. He remembered the raw honesty of her pain. If he built a life with her on this lie, he would be exactly the monster she feared he was. He would be stealing her agency again, just like he had stolen her future 3 years ago. Enzo washed his face with cold water. He dried it with a towel that smelled like her. His chest ached with a heavy, crushing pressure. He loved her. The realization was a sharp, physical pain. He loved her enough to destroy himself in her eyes. He picked up the phone, unlocked the door, and walked back to the kitchen. Clara looked up as he entered. She smiled, a shy, tentative thing. "Is everything okay? You look pale." Enzo didn't sit down. He stood by the counter, putting distance between them. He needed the distance. If he was close to her, he would beg, and he didn't deserve to beg. "Clara," he said. His voice was quiet, flat, dead. "Put the coffee down." Clara's smile faltered. She set the mug on the table. "Enzo, what is it? Is it the rival family? Did they find us?" "No," Enzo said. "It is about the accident." Clara went still. "What about it?" Enzo took a breath. It felt like inhaling glass. "Marco found the police report, the real one, not the public file." He watched her. He memorized her face, knowing it was the last time she would look at him without hatred. 3 years ago, on Christmas Eve, I had a shipment stolen, Enzo said, reciting the facts like a list of charges. "I ordered my men to chase the thieves. They were driving a black sedan. They headed toward the docks." Clara stared at him, her brows knitting together. "Yes, I told you. A black sedan. I gave the order to stop them," Enzo continued. "I told my men to shoot out the tires if they had to. It was a reckless order. It was a stupid order." He paused. "One of my men missed. The bullet hit a gray Honda Civic. It blew the tire." The silence in the kitchen was absolute. The refrigerator hummed. The wind rattled the window pane. Clara sat frozen, her face drained of all color, leaving her skin looking like parchment. She stared at him, her eyes widening as the pieces clicked together. The crash, the gunfire, the guilt he had shown when she told him, the money for Evan. "No," she whispered. "It was my men," Enzo said. "It was my order. I killed Lena, and I did this to you." He gestured vaguely to her leg, unable to look at it. Clara stood up. The chair scraped loudly against the linoleum. She backed away from the table, her hands coming up to cover her mouth. "You knew," she choked out. "You knew the whole time." "I suspected last night," Enzo said. "I confirmed it 5 minutes ago. You—" Clara shook her head, a violent tremor running through her body. "You held me. You kissed my scar. You acted like you were saving me." "Clara, I didn't know it was you." Enzo stepped forward, his hand raising in a pleading gesture. "I swear on my mother's grave, I didn't know." "Don't you dare!" Clara screamed. The sound tore from her throat, raw and jagged. "Don't you dare speak to me. You killed her. She was 24 years old, and you... She looked down at herself, at his shirt she was wearing. She grabbed the fabric and tore at it as if it were burning her skin. "You slept with me," she whispered, her voice trembling with horror. "Was that it? Was it guilt? Did you look at the cripple you made and think, I'll throw her some money and give her a good night and that will fix it?" "No!" Enzo shouted, the accusation cutting him deeper than a knife. "I love you. That is why I am telling you. I could have burned the file. Clara, I could have lied to you forever, but I couldn't do that to you." "Love?" Clara laughed, a high, hysterical sound that cracked in the middle. "You don't know what love is. You are a disease, Enzo. You destroy everything you touch. You destroyed my body. You killed my best friend, and now you destroyed this." She gestured to the room, to the illusion of safety they had built. "I hate you!" She spat the words at him. "I wish I'd never met you. I wish I'd died in that car so I wouldn't have to look at you." Enzo took the words. He stood there and let them hit him. He deserved them. He deserved worse. "I know," he said softly. "I will make it right. I will pay for everything. You and Evan, you will never want for anything." "I don't want your blood money," Clara screamed. She turned and scrambled toward the bedroom, her bad leg dragging, her grace gone. "I want my life back. I want my friend back." She slammed the bedroom door. Enzo heard the lock click. Then he heard the sound of weeping, loud and broken, coming through the thin wood. He stood in the kitchen, surrounded by the smell of the breakfast he had cooked for her, and felt his heart turn to ash. 10 minutes later, the bedroom door opened. Clara came out. She was dressed in her own clothes, the sweater and skirt from the night before. She was carrying her bag. Her face was blotchy and swollen, her eyes red-rimmed, but her expression was cold as ice. "I am leaving," she said. Enzo blocked the front door. "Clara, you cannot leave. Darius Cole is still out there. The mole is still active. It is not safe." "I don't care," Clara said. She walked toward him, not stopping. "Move? Clara, please," Enzo begged. He looked shattered, his arrogance gone. "Stay here. Lock the door to the bedroom. Don't talk to me. Just stay where I can keep you alive." "Alive?" Clara looked at him with dead eyes. "I am not safe with you. Enzo, you are the danger." "You always were." She reached the door. Enzo put his hand on the handle, holding it shut. "If you walk out that door," he said, his voice desperate, "you are walking into a war zone." "I have been in a war zone for 3 years," Clara said. "And you started it." She looked pointedly at his hand on the door. "Let me go. Or are you going to force me to stay? Is that the kind of monster you are?" Enzo looked at her. He saw the hatred in her eyes. If he kept her here against her will, he would be just another jailer. He would be confirming everything she thought of him. Slowly, painfully, he removed his hand from the latch. "I will have a car follow you," he said quietly, "at a distance, just to make sure you get home." "Don't," Clara said. "Stay away from me. Stay away from Evan. If I ever see you again, I will call the police and tell them everything I know about this safe house." She opened the door. The cold winter air rushed in, biting and clean. She stepped out onto the porch, limping heavily, struggling with the zipper of her coat as her hands shook. She didn't look back. She walked down the steps to the snowy sidewalk and began to make her way toward the main road where she could hail a cab. Enzo watched her go until she was just a small, gray figure against the white snow. Then he closed the door, slid down against it until he hit the floor, and buried his face in his hands. Clara's apartment felt foreign. It was cold, the heater having been off for days. It smelled of stale air and dust. She dropped her bag on the floor and collapsed onto her cheap sofa. She didn't cry. She felt hollowed out, scraped empty. The door opened an hour later. Evan walked in, shaking snow from his jacket. He stopped when he saw her. "Clara!" He rushed over, dropping his backpack. "You're back. You didn't text. I was worried." He hugged her. Clara clung to him, smelling his familiar detergent, feeling the bony reality of his shoulders. He was alive. He was safe. "I'm okay," she lied into his jacket. I finished the job early." "Mr. Rossi called," Evan said, pulling back, his face beaming. "Did you see the email? The tuition. Clara, it's paid. All of it. We don't have to worry about the loan." Clara felt a wave of nausea. "Yeah, it's great." "Evan, what's wrong?" Evan's smile faded. You look like you've been crying." "Just tired." Clara stood up, her leg throbbing. "I need a shower." "Okay, well, look, someone left a card for us," Evan said. He walked to the small table by the door. "It was inside the apartment when I got home from the library." "I thought you left it." Clara froze. "Inside the apartment?" "Yeah, on the mat." Evan picked up a red envelope. "It's weird, though. It's sealed with wax." "Evan, don't open it," Clara said sharply, but he had already torn the flap. He frowned. "There's something heavy in here." He tipped the envelope. A knife slid out. It was a small, sleek switchblade. It clattered onto the table, gleaming in the fluorescent light. Evan jumped back. "What the hell?" Clara rushed forward. She grabbed the envelope from his hand. There was a card inside. She pulled it out. It was a Christmas card, generic and cheerful, with a picture of a snowman. But written across the inside in bold, black marker was a message. "Merry Christmas. Enzo." Clara's blood ran cold. They had found her. The safe house hadn't been compromised, but her life had. Darius Cole knew who she was. He knew where she lived, and he knew she mattered to Enzo. Her phone rang. It was a blocked number. Clara stared at it. The room seemed to spin. "Clara, whose knife is that?" Evan asked, his voice rising in panic. "What is going on?" "Quiet," Clara hissed. She picked up the phone. Her hand was shaking so hard she almost dropped it. "Hello?" "Miss Hayes, A voice purred on the other end. It was smooth, cultured, and terrifying. Or should I say, Mrs. Valenti, though I hear there was a bit of a domestic dispute this morning. Who is this? Clara asked, gripping the table. My name is Darius Cole, the man said. I believe you have something that belongs to me, or rather, you have the attention of a man I want. I don't know him, Clara said. I quit. I left him. I know, Darius said. I watched you leave that charming little townhouse in Northwood. Very dramatic. But see, that's the problem. Enzo Valenti doesn't let people leave unless he loves them enough to let them go. And that makes you valuable. Leave us alone, Clara pleaded. I have nothing to do with this. You have everything to do with this, Darius said. His voice hardened. Look out the window, Clara. Clara moved to the window. She pulled back the curtain an inch. Down on the street, a black SUV was idling. A man was leaning against it, looking up at her apartment. He waved. I see you have a brother, Darius said. Evan. Engineering student. Bright kid. Don't you touch him, Clara snarled, a mother lion protecting her cub. If you touch him, I swear to God, God isn't listening. Clara, only I am, Darius interrupted. Here is the deal. You are going to call your ex-lover. You are going to tell him you made a mistake. You are going to tell him you want to meet him. Tonight. No, Clara said. I won't. Then Evan dies, Darius said simply. I will have my men come up there right now. It will be messy, and I will make you watch. Clara looked at Evan. He was standing by the table, staring at the knife, his face pale with confusion and fear. He was innocent. He had done nothing but study and love her. She hated Enzo Valenti. She hated him for the crash. She hated him for the lies. She hated him for bringing this darkness into her home. But she knew, with a sick, sinking certainty, that he was the only monster powerful enough to stop these other monsters. Where? Clara whispered into the phone. The old cannery on the waterfront, Darius said. Make the call. Clara, be convincing, or your brother gets a very sharp Christmas present. The line went dead. Clara lowered the phone. She looked at the knife on the table. She looked at her brother. She had to betray the man who had destroyed her past to save the only future she had left. The warehouse district was a graveyard of steel and rotting wood, sitting on the edge of the harbor where the black water lapped against the pilings, like oil. It was bitterly cold, the wind cutting through the broken windows of Cannery 4, whistling a low, mournful tune. Clara stood in the center of the vast, empty floor. She was shivering, not just from the cold, but from the terrifying sense of déjà vu. This warehouse was less than a mile from the intersection where her life had been destroyed 3 years ago. The smell of the ocean mixed with gasoline made her nauseous. She wore her heavy wool coat, but her legs were bare beneath her skirt, save for the thick, rigid outline of her brace. She had no weapon. Darius had been specific. You look nervous, Clara. A voice echoed from the shadows of a rusted catwalk. Darius Cole stepped into the dim light. He was a handsome man in a way that made one think of a shark, sleek, sharp, and soulless. He wore a camel hair coat that looked pristine against the grime of the factory. Where is Evan? Clara demanded, her voice echoing in the hollow space. Safe, Darius said, descending the metal stairs. The sound of his expensive shoes clanging on the grate was rhythmic and menacing. For now, he's in a storage unit about 10 minutes from here, if you do exactly what I say. He goes back to his textbooks tonight. If you don't, well, I hear engineering is a difficult major to pursue without fingers. Clara felt bile rise in her throat. She clenched her hands into fists to stop them from shaking. What do you want? I want the King of Harborview, Darius said, stopping 10 feet from her. He looked her up and down, his gaze lingering with cruel amusement on her left leg. I want Enzo Valenti, and I want him to walk into this room knowing that he has already lost. He pulled a phone from his pocket and held it out to her. Call him, Darius commanded. Tell him you made a mistake. Tell him you want to come back, but you are scared. Tell him to meet you here, alone. Tell him you need to talk about... He paused, sneering. About your future. Clara took the phone. Her fingers felt numb. She knew the plan. Darius would kill Enzo the moment he stepped through the door. Then he would kill her and frame it as a lover's quarrel gone wrong, or a tragic accident. She was the bait in a trap designed to decapitate the Valenti family. She dialed the number she had deleted, but never forgotten. It rang once. Clara. Enzo's voice was a wreck. It was hoarse, rough, and laced with a desperation that broke her heart instantly. He sounded like a man who hadn't slept, eaten, or breathed since she walked out his door. "Enzo," Clara said. Her voice trembled, which Darius took for fear, nodding approvingly. I made a mistake." "Where are you?" Enzo asked immediately. The authority was gone. There was only raw panic. "Are you safe? I have been driving around the city for hours looking for you. I'm at the old cannery," Clara said, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Near the docks. I need you to come. Please, I need to see you." "I am coming," Enzo said. "Stay there. I am coming." "Come alone," Clara added, looking at Darius, who was pointing a gun at her head. "Please, Enzo, I can't handle anyone else right now. I just want to talk." "I will come alone," Enzo promised. Clara took a breath. She had to warn him. She had to tell him this was a trap without getting Evan killed. She thought back to their conversation on Christmas Eve, the words he had spoken before the lights went out. "Enzo," she whispered, her voice catching. "I want to talk about what is between my past and my future." There was a silence on the other end of the line. It lasted only a second, but it felt like a lifetime. The phrase was clumsy, awkward. It was the code they had never formally agreed upon but instinctively understood. "What is between your legs?" That had been the question. Her answer had been pain and metal. Now, she was telling him that the pain and metal were here. "I understand," Enzo said. His voice changed. The desperation hardened into something cold and lethal. "I will be there in 20 minutes. The line went dead. Darius snatched the phone back. "Touching, truly, you almost sounded like you meant it." He gestured to two men who emerged from the shadows carrying zip ties and a heavy chair. "Sit." They tied Clara to the chair in the center of the room. They pulled the ties tight, cutting into her wrists. Then, Darius leaned down and inspected her leg. "Ugly thing," he muttered, tapping the carbon fiber brace with the barrel of his gun. Valenti always did have a taste for broken toys. He stood up and walked away into the darkness, blending into the shadows with his men. Clara was left alone in the spotlight of a single, flickering overhead bulb. The pain in her wrists was sharp, but the pain in her leg was worse. The angle of the chair dug the top strap of the brace into her thigh. Clara focused on that pain. She used it. She breathed into it. "I am not a victim," she told herself. "I am the woman who walked when they said I wouldn't." Slowly, imperceptibly, she began to shift her leg. She pressed her thigh against the metal of the chair leg, using the friction to work at the top buckle of the brace. It was a heavy-duty clasp designed to hold her weight, but the strap was old leather, reinforced with nylon. She twisted her leg. The metal dug into her skin, likely drawing blood, but she felt the tension in the strap loosen by a fraction of an inch. She kept working, her eyes fixed on the rusted door at the far end of the warehouse, her heart hammering a countdown. Enzo arrived 18 minutes later. He didn't kick the door down. He didn't drive a car through the wall. The heavy iron door creaked open, and Lorenzo Valenti walked in. He was wearing his long black wool coat, the collar turned up against the wind. His hands were raised above his head, palms open. He walked into the circle of light and stopped 10 feet from Clara. He looked terrible. His eyes were dark hollows, his face unshaven, his skin pale. But when he looked at her, his gaze was a physical embrace. He checked her for blood, for bruises, and when he saw she was alive, a momentary relief washed over him. Then he looked at her leg. He saw the way she was holding it, the slight, unnatural angle. He saw the fire in her eyes. He understood. "I am here." Enzo called out to the darkness. "Alone, just as you asked." Slow applause echoed from the catwalk. Darius emerged, flanked by 6 men with assault rifles. "Lorenzo Valenti," Darius grinned. "The man who never surrenders. Look at you. Knees weak for a maid. Let her go, Darius, Enzo said, calm, his voice carrying effortlessly. You have me. I am the prize. Let the girl and her brother walk away, and I will stay. You aren't in a position to negotiate. Darius laughed. He signaled to the men closest to Enzo. Check him. 2 men approached Enzo. They patted him down roughly. They found the gun tucked into the back of his waistband and tossed it away. They found a knife in his boot and threw it into the corner. Clean! One of the men grunted. Good, Darius said. He walked down the stairs, his face twisting into a sneer. You know, Enzo, for years I wondered what it would take to bring you down. I thought it would be money or power. I never thought it would be a cripple with a sob story. Enzo's jaw tightened, but he didn't rise to the bait. Let her go. No, Darius said. I don't think I will. I think I'm going to kill her. But first, I want you to watch. He nodded to his men. Teach him some manners. The first blow caught Enzo in the stomach, doubling him over. The second was a rifle butt to the jaw that sent him crashing to the concrete. No! Clara screamed, struggling against her bonds. Stop it! Leave him alone! Enzo groaned, spitting blood onto the floor. He tried to stand, but a boot to the ribs sent him back down. They kicked him with calculated brutality, aiming for the kidneys, the ribs, the face. Clara sobbed, thrashing in the chair. Darius, please, stop, I'll do anything. Enzo lifted his head. His face was a mask of blood, one eye swelling shut. He looked at Clara. He didn't look defeated. He looked apologetic. I am sorry, his eyes said. I am sorry I brought this to you. Darius raised a hand and the beating stopped. Enzo was on his knees, swaying, his breath coming in ragged, wet gasps. Darius walked over and placed the barrel of his gun against Enzo's forehead. Any last words? Valenti, Darius asked softly. Yeah, Enzo rasped, blood bubbling on his lips. You should have checked her leg. Darius frowned. What? Clara moved. She wrenched her left leg with every ounce of strength she possessed. The loosened strap snapped with a loud crack. The heavy metal framework of the brace, now unanchored at the top, swung free like a pendulum of steel. Clara screamed, a primal sound of effort, and kicked out. The guard standing next to her chair never saw it coming. The solid steel hinge of the brace slammed into his kneecap with the force of a sledgehammer. The bone shattered. The sound was sickening. Loud as a gunshot, the guard shrieked, collapsing backward, his fingers spasming on the trigger of his automatic rifle. The gun fired wildly, spraying bullets into the ceiling and the catwalk. Chaos erupted. In the split second of distraction, Enzo moved. He didn't move like a beaten man. He surged upward, driving his shoulder into Darius's midsection. The gun went off, the bullet tearing through the shoulder of Enzo's coat. But Enzo didn't stop. He tackled Darius, knocking him into the crates. The other guards opened fire. Clara, get down! Enzo roared. Clara threw herself in the chair sideways, hitting the floor hard just as bullets chewed up the wood where she had been sitting. Enzo rolled, snatching a drop pistol from the floor. He fired twice, dropping 2 of the guards, but he was exposed. Darius scrambled up, his face twisted in fury. He raised his gun, aiming not at Enzo, but at Clara, who was struggling to free her hands from the zip ties on the overturned chair. No! Enzo shouted. He threw himself across the open space. He didn't fire. He dove. Darius pulled the trigger. The bullet hit Enzo in the side. The impact spun him around, but he landed in front of Clara, his body a shield between her and the death that was coming. Darius adjusted his aim for the kill shot. Enzo, lying on the floor with blood spreading across his shirt, raised his pistol. His hand was steady. His vision was blurring, but his focus was absolute. He fired 1 shot. The bullet struck Darius in the center of his chest. The rival boss looked surprised. He stumbled backward, his gun clattering to the floor, and collapsed against a stack of shipping pallets. He slid down, leaving a bright red streak on the wood, and didn't move again. Sudden, deafening noise filled the warehouse as the main doors burst open. "Federal agents, drop your weapons!" It wasn't agents. It was Marco. He led a team of 12 men storming the building with tactical precision. The remaining guards, seeing their boss dead and being outgunned, threw down their weapons, Enzo didn't watch them surrender. He collapsed back against Clara's legs. "Enzo!" Clara screamed. The zip ties had snapped when the chair broke apart. She scrambled free, ignoring the pain in her unbraced leg, and pulled him into her lap. "Enzo, look at me. Look at me." He was heavy. So heavy. Blood was soaking through his coat, warm and sticky on her hands. His face was pale, his eyes fluttering. "Clara," he whispered. A faint, bloody smile touched his lips. "I always wanted to see you look at me like that." "Like what?" she sobbed, pressing her hands frantically against the wound in his side. "Like I'm terrified? Like I am worth saving," he wheezed. "You idiot," Clara cried, tears falling onto his face, mixing with the blood. "You absolute idiot. You murderer. You can't die. You hear me? You aren't allowed to die after you ruined my life." She brushed the hair back from his forehead, her touch frantic but gentle. "You are the only man who ever made me feel like I wasn't broken. You don't get to leave me." Enzo reached up, his hand trembling violently, and cupped her cheek. His thumb brushed away a tear. "If I live," he whispered, his voice fading, "I am done. No more, I promise." His hand fell from her cheek, his eyes rolled back. "Enzo!" Clara screamed, her voice echoing in the vast, cold warehouse. "Help him! Somebody help him!" Marco was there a second later, shouting orders into a radio, but Clara didn't hear him. She just held Enzo Valenti against her chest, rocking him, staining her clothes with his blood, praying to a god she hadn't spoken to in years to save the monster she loved. The hospital room was sterile and white, a stark contrast to the warehouse. Enzo survived. The surgery took 8 hours. He had lost a lot of blood, and the bullet in his shoulder had shattered the bone. But he was alive. 3 days later, the district attorney walked into his recovery room. Marco stood by the window. Clara sat in the chair by the bed, holding Enzo's hand. "Mr. Valenti," the DA said, "we have a lot to discuss." Enzo looked at Clara. He saw the exhaustion in her face, but also the relief. He saw the way she held his hand, as if she was afraid he would disappear. "I have a proposal," Enzo said, his voice raspy. "I will give you everything, the ledgers, the contacts, the routes. I will testify against the council. I will dismantle the Valenti organization from the inside out." The DA looked stunned. That is a death sentence. "Mr. Valenti, why would you do that?" "In exchange for immunity," Enzo said. "Not for me, for her, and her brother, and for me. I want witness protection, new identities. A ghost life." "You want to walk away?" the DA asked skeptically. "Men like you don't walk away." Enzo squeezed Clara's hand. She squeezed back, hard. "I'm not a man like that anymore," Enzo said. "I traded my empire for something better." 9 months later. The town was small, tucked away in the mountains of Montana where the snow was deep and clean. Not gray slush like in the city. The air smelled of pine and wood smoke. The house was small, with creaky floorboards and a drafty front door, but it was theirs. It was Christmas Eve. In the living room, a fire crackled in the hearth. A Christmas tree stood in the corner. It was artificial, bought from the local hardware store for $20, but it sparkled with hundreds of white lights. Clara stood by the window, watching the snow fall. She looked different. Her hair was longer. She wore a red velvet dress that stopped just above the knee. She didn't hide her legs anymore. The brace was still there. It would always be there. But this one was new. Custom-fitted titanium, sleek and low profile. It was a part of her, but it didn't define her. Enzo walked into the room. He walked with a slight stiffness in his shoulder, a reminder of the warehouse, but his face was relaxed. The tension that had defined him for a decade was gone. He wore a flannel shirt and jeans, his hands stained with grease from the auto shop where he worked as a mechanic. He was no longer Enzo Valenti. He was just a man named Jack who fixed cars and came home to his wife. "Evan called," Enzo said, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "He's driving up in the morning. He got an A on his final." "He's a nerd," Clara smiled, leaning back into him. Enzo turned her around. He looked at her. his eyes dark and warm, filled with a love that had survived fire and blood. He sank down onto one knee. Clara's breath hitched. "What are you doing?" Enzo rested his hands gently on her left leg, his fingers tracing the line where her skin met the cool metal of the brace. He looked up at her, the firelight dancing in his eyes. "I have a question," he said softly. Clara smiled, tears prickling her eyes. "I think I've heard this one before." "So, Clara," Enzo whispered, his voice trembling with emotion, "tell me, what is between your legs now?" Clara didn't flinch. She didn't look away. She laughed, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy that filled the small room. She placed her hand over his, pressing it against the brace. "Strength," she answered, her voice clear and proud. "Scars." She leaned down, cupping his face in her hands. "My future," she whispered, "and you, if I let you stay." Enzo looked at her, his expression fierce and tender. "I will spend the rest of my life proving I deserve to stay." Clara pulled him up. She kissed him, a deep, slow kiss that tasted of forgiveness, of desire, and of the quiet, enduring hope of a second chance. Outside, the snow continued to fall, burying the past, leaving the world white and new. Thank you so much for listening to What's Between Your Legs. I hope this story touched your heart as much as it did mine. I would love to know where you're listening from, so please drop your country or city in the comments below. If you enjoyed Enzo and Clara's journey from darkness to light, please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Mafia Romance Stories for more emotional, realistic, and passionate tales. Share your thoughts on the ending in the comments. I read every single one. Until next time.